Welcome to this mid tier list video and welcome to the Judge of Obelisk. This is a mid tier list for 731B and this tier list is very data driven. I'm looking primarily at stats and I'm looking at high level games, high level pub games, divine and immortal level primarily, and we'll also be taking into account to some extent low level performance for these heroes. And I'm going to be pointing out there's a big difference in how heroes perform at different skill levels. So let's start right away with the S tier. We have two heroes here that are just currently a bit overpowered. We have Lone Druid, one of my favorite heroes, has huge win rate. Pick rate's not that high to be honest, but still this hero is very, very powerful. I'm currently on a big win streak with this hero and he just plays so smoothly. He's got a couple of buffs in a recent patch, and Wraith Band stacking is actually surprisingly good. I'm going to be making a video on that very soon as well. And just everything aligns for this hero in this patch. He's just super strong in the mid game, very good at taking objectives, and that's also why he's not quite as good in low level games. But currently this hero is so strong that even in the lower tiers he still has high win rates. So super solid hero, great to pick up. Next we have Huska, who also is a hero that's very strong in the mid game. Also a hero that tends to want to end games early. But he's so strong that even he is also very great in low level games. And yeah, super solid hero. You can pick him in almost any game and he's going to do well. Very strong laner, very high tempo hero. Of course, he's vulnerable to burst, especially before his BKB, but on the whole, this hero is amazing. Not that easy to play, surprisingly. A lot of people would say, okay, Huska is super straightforward, but actually it takes quite a bit of skill to master Huska. You have to be reasonably good at armlet toggling, and just the fact that you have to end games early always makes heroes a bit harder to play. But super worthwhile hero to learn right now. Moving on to the A tier, we have heroes that are a bit above the curve, that are a bit stronger than average, but not really broken. So first of all, we got Visage, who is a very solid hero in a multitude of roles. You can play him basically in any role except carry, and he benefits a lot from the introduction of the Boots of Bearing. Visage is a hero that wants to fight with his team in the mid game. He wants to hit these mid game timings, and for that, Drum was always a pretty good item on Visage, but it was kind of a dead end item at this mid level cost point. So it was a bit awkward to buy, but now that you have Boots of Bearing, it just solves a lot of problems that Visage had, because Tranquil Boots are already a great item on this hero. So this hero is very, very solid right now. Next, we've got Primal Beast. Primarily played as an offlaner, but he also does surprisingly well in the mid lane and just has pretty solid win rates in high level games. This hero does not do as well in lower level games, so you can see the win rates falls off quite drastically. But definitely if you're good at playing this hero, he can do a lot. He's very good at initiating a nice high tempo mid laner. Then we have Pugna, hero that was buffed out of the zoo in the last patch and it's just super solid. Strong counter against certain heroes with the Nether Ward. Some heroes that just rely on spending a lot of mana, something like an OD for example, or a Skywrath Mage, have a very hard time playing against Pugna. And just this life drain ability, once you hit level 6, that just completely warps the lane. It completely changes the way the lane is played, because you can use this every 7 seconds, and there's basically no hero, or almost no hero, that can actually stand up in lane against Pugna once you hit level 6. And even before then, he's very, very solid. You can get secure last hits with Decrepify by just decrepifying the enemy hero, and then you can get all the last hits and denies you want. Another blast great at pushing out the wave, can also damage towers. So this hero is very powerful, strong tempo hero, but does tend to fall off later on in the game. That's something you have to keep in mind. Storm Spirit, currently the strongest of the spirits. Very solid hero, can farm decently well and scales quite well, great initiation. You know how Storm is played. Nothing much has changed about this hero, he's just a bit stronger than he used to be. Next you have Arc Warden, who is surprisingly strong as a mid laner right now. He was in one sense nerfed, in that the Tempest Double now does reduced damage if it is more than 2000 units away from the real set. But this hero is actually just really solid at just fighting straight up with like hero plus double. You just do twice the damage a normal hero would do. You have great stat gain now. This hero, if you play him in a less greedy way, maybe you go treads instead of boots of travel and just focus more on like actually fighting with your team instead of just split pushing, can actually do surprisingly well. It's also great that he has a nice mixture of right click damage, physical damage, and magic damage, with his Spark Wraiths and Flux doing quite a bit of magic damage. So this hero seems very solid to me and has quite good win rates if you know how to play him well. It's not an easy hero to play, to be honest, but worth learning right now. Then we've got TA, also kind of a challenging hero to play, but she's very strong, good laner in most matchups, and in matchups that she doesn't do well, you can usually still just push out the wave and just farm. A great physical damage output, obviously. As mid laner, you typically don't rely too much on the Aghanims, but it's definitely an option later on in the game. It gives you huge global mobility. But this hero is just good at just doing physical damage, she's great at roshing, and it's like a nice mid lane hero that's sort of a mixture between like carry mid and tempo mid. Death Prophet was hugely buffed in 731. Now, she received a minor buff to her shard, but the main buff she got is kind of undocumented, and that is to Exorcism. The Exorcism ghosts now do full damage to towers, whereas previously they used to have hero damage, which meant they only did 50% damage. Now Exorcism does twice as much damage to towers as it used to do. So that makes Death Prophet a very powerful hero right now, and great at taking objectives, and as a mid laner you can take the tier 1 towers super fast. That said, she tends to fall off a bit in lower level games because she's more of a tempo hero and you need the team to kind of play around you at least a little bit. But if that is the case, then this hero is super powerful. Then we have a bit of a spicy addition, Keeper of the Light. Kotl, of course, is the hero that farms really well, but the problem is, like, what do you do with that farm? And the answer that seems to be emerging is that you go for a magic damage burst build with Dagon and E-Blade. The new E-Blade, of course, quite strong on int heroes now, and that seems to have a lot of success. I haven't experimented with this playstyle myself, but, you know, just looking at the numbers, Kotl as a mid laner seems to be winning quite a bit recently. Then we've got Batrider, very solid mid laner, not much to say about that one. Pango received some minor buff in 731, but he's always been a solid mid laner, good damage output, decent amount of control in team fights, huge mobility, so just a very, very solid mid laner. Next up, we have two of the cheesier heroes. We have Meepo and Broodmother. In some ways, similar heroes. They farm super fast, they hit mid-game timings, and then they fall off in the late game. And they have certain counters that they want to avoid, but if you get a good matchup with these heroes, they can really dominate games. Then we've got Tiny, more of a carry hero in this patch. Of course, benefited hugely from moving that amazing shard to the 15-minute mark, so we can now farm faster and just come online earlier. Of course, as a mid laner, you're building a bit more around this magic damage burst style, but still, as mid laner, you still greatly appreciate getting that earlier shard. So pretty solid mid laner. Then we've got Invoker and Puck. We're going to use both of these a bit together. They're both heroes that have average win rates, but extremely high pick rates, because they're just solid heroes that fit into a lot of games. They're also fun to play, so that's why a lot of mid players really like playing them. But yeah, they're super solid. You're never gonna go too wrong with an Invoker or a Puck pick. Windranger, strong pick-off hero, has an advantage of also being viable in other roles. You can play as an offlaner, as a +4, that's all perfectly fine. And yeah, just have super high single target damage and can sort of delete people with your shackle shots plus ulti. Sand King, very situational mid laner, not picked in the mid lane very often, but has a very strong win rate. and he's just very good in certain situations, like in certain matchups, against certain lineups. He can be a very solid pick. For example, I recently had a game where I was playing Lone Druid and I was queuing for mid lane, and my offlaner was picking Sand King, but then we just swapped lanes and had Sand King in the mid lane because I was facing against Meepo, and Sand King just does a lot better against Meepo, and if you're playing against the Meepo lineup, you want to have some sort of hero like Sand King with a lot of farm that can dish out huge amounts of magic damage, and that worked out really well for us. Next up, we have the B tier. These are heroes that are balanced, they're perfectly fine, neither too strong nor too weak, and these heroes that are great to pick if you either really like that hero or if it's a good game for that hero. And first on the list is going to be Necro. You might think this hero hasn't changed too much, but actually the big change here is the new shard. This new shard is very powerful, especially the fact that it's available at 15 minutes. It really helps this hero because it allows you to push out waves much faster than you could in the past, and that is what makes the hero quite powerful right now. Alchemist, not a very frequent pick, but he gets good win rates fairly consistently, so he's up here in the high B tier. Lina, very powerful, solid laner. It's rarely a bad Lina game, and of course he has a good mix of physical and magical damage. Pretty solid hero. Problem is she's quite tempo based, so if you like die once or twice, you really lose momentum, and then it can be a bit hard to make things happen as Lina. Next, we've got Leshrac, of course, huge amounts of AoE magic damage. If that is what you need, Leshrac is your go-to mid laner. Shadow Friend is a hero that can be played in sort of two different ways. You can either go more physical damage or more magical damage. And the mid lane, of course, lends itself to going for more magic damage build, because obviously you're going to go for a Shadow Race to be able to push out waves. But, you know, the physical damage is really where it's at with Shadow Fiend right now. You just get so much bonus damage and armor reduction that I almost feel like Shadow Fiend is probably a bit better as a carry right now than as a mid laner. But of course still pretty decent as a mid. Mars as a mid laner is kind of similar to Sand King, that is usually an off laner, but in certain matchups, in certain lineups, he can be quite strong. I think he just does a lot of similar things as Sand King does, so I think most of the time picking Sand King is probably a bit better. But yeah, he's like a strong tempo AoE hero that can also play as a mid laner. Ember Spirit, another spirit hero here. Spirits, of course, have been nerfed a bit compared to their glory days, but Ember Spirit is still a perfectly fine hero. You can also now go for more of a physical damage build with the buff to Sleight of Fist. So even something like a Battlefield build would be possible, but as a mid laner, probably not. But definitely something to be thinking about. But even though this hero is picked quite a bit, his win rate is rather mediocre, which is why I can't put him any higher than this. Razor, a very strong tempo hero, very matchup dependent. In certain lanes he can do really well, other lanes not as much. You want some sort of slower hero, ideally melee hero, to lane against, so you can suck them dry with your static link. And then it's all about hitting your mid-game timings with like your BKB, your refresher, and things like that. Ricky, another powerful mid-game hero. He's more of a carry hero typically, but you can also play him as a mid. He hits some strong timings at level 6, and then especially once you hit your Diffu. And of course, with Diffu being a bit cheaper this patch, that helps Ricky come online a little bit earlier. So a great hero at getting pickoffs and just being mobile around the map and finding isolated heroes. Tinker has been nerfed a bit from his glory days in the previous patch, but he's still a very solid hero. Viper, also fairly solid hero, does a good mix of physical and magical damage, but the problem with this hero is that he's super slow and just lacks any sort of mobility, which can be a bit of a problem with this hero. Bloodseeker, not necessarily the most typical mid lane hero, but he can do quite well. He's a strong tempo mid. You can find kills with the ultimate, and you also get a surprising amount of value out of Blood Right. You can spam that out and do a decent job in team fights as well. Skyrath Mage, a bit of a cheesy hero. He's great at dominating his lane and then sort of snowballing from there. Problem with this hero is once you get stopped, once your momentum gets stopped, he just really falls off and is no longer worth a mid slot. But in some situations, you can just snowball your way to victory. Magnus, he's fine as a mid laner. He's of course good at farming, a strong team fighter, can also nicely buff up your carry, but nothing too spectacular about this hero. Quap, still a solid mid laner. She's picked quite a lot. Her win rates are not the best. Kind of similar to Lina. She's a strong laner, but once you die a couple of times, you're really out of it. And once you're behind on the Quap of Pain, it's hard to make anything happen. Sniper, hero that does surprisingly well on this patch, especially in lower level games. This is the kind of hero that's straightforward to play, so noobs can play him quite well. And the great thing about lower level games is that people are bad at initiating, and that really favors Sniper's playstyle. Once you get to higher levels, he does a little bit worse, but still the hero is just super solid right now. You can just get your treads, you get like a Mask of Madness, you get like a Wraith Banner too, and you're already off to the races, and you can do quite well on this hero. Monkey King, a great counter pick in certain matchups against especially slow melee heroes. He does quite well in mid lane. In other matchups he struggles a bit more, but you can definitely do a lot around the map and play very active with this hero. Morphling as a mid laner suffers a bit from the change to E-Blade. It's no longer really an agi focused item, but you can still just build normal items on Morphling, but definitely not a premium mid laner in this patch. Onto the C tier. These are heroes that are more situational. If you really like them, you can play them, but these are not heroes I would recommend you learn in the current patch. Doom, bit of a funky mid laner, usually more of an offlaner, but can work as a mid laner as well. Same thing for Legion Commander. These heroes are kind of similar. They have these strong pick-off ultimates and can farm reasonably well. Legion Commander, of course, is a bit more control and a bit more anti many units, so she's quite good against some sort of zoo lineup. Then we have two very traditional mid laners, Dragonknight and Kunkka. They're both still like solid heroes. They do fine in lane, but they've just been nerfed like a little bit too much in the current meta. They're just a bit overshadowed by other heroes, which is why their win rates are not the greatest. Void Spirit is a bit of a weaker spirit right now. If you want a spirit, probably go with Ember Spirit or even better Storm Spirit. But you can still make him work. His win rate is just not that good. OD kind of suffers a bit of an identity crisis right now because the meme hammer was nerfed, so that's no longer really good. You can go for some sort of right-click build, but it's not really that great either. You need like a lot of items to really make that playstyle work. And if you don't have BKB, there's not much you can do in a fight because this hero is still quite squishy, has fairly low range. So it's a bit hard to make this hero work, but it can definitely be done. Earth Spirit, another spirit, probably the most aggressive of all the spirits. And he's usually, of course, played as a POS 4, but as a POS 2, he can work. You just have to like play a very high tempo game and end the game early. Timbersaw, probably rather play him as an offlaner. Of course, mid lane you're gonna struggle because there's not as many trees. But can work in certain situations. It's a counter to like zoo heroes and stuff like that, but probably rather see him as an offlaner. Silencer is just more of a support hero. He's great as a support, but as a mid laner, similar to OD, kind of required too many items to really make him work, and also he can't really farm very well, so I'd just play him as a support. Tusk, another hero that's just more support. You can do some sort of burst build where you get like Desolator and stuff like that and try to one-shot people. but it's just a bit funky and too hard to make work, so just play him as a support. Zeus, the rework to Zeus made him quite a bit worse. You farm much slower now that you no longer have your aura here. Static field is now on the bound to the shard, so that means you're just gonna push out the wave slower. You're gonna be weaker in lane, and this hero just doesn't do too well. In lower level games, he still does reasonably fine, but the higher you go, the lower the win rate tends to get on this hero. And in immortal level pubs, he's really shitting the bed. So I would avoid this hero. Grimstroke, I just don't play him as a mid laner. Some people are trying to make this work, similar to like Hoodwink. These heroes just don't work that well as cores. Just stick to support roles with these heroes. Nature's Prophet can work in certain lineups. He's very hard to play though, and it's just currently not really worth learning because the hero is so hard to play, and he just has gotten so many nerfs over the years that it's just hard to make him work. Jakiro, some people are trying one as a core. If you want to play him as a core, I think offlane is a much better role for him. But as mid laner, he really tends to struggle. Just don't do that. Snapfire, similar story. Just don't play her as a mid laner. She just doesn't fit that role. That's pretty much the story for all these heroes down the D tier. These are fine heroes in their own right, but they just don't fit the mid role. But for some reason, a decent number of people are trying to make them work in mid and generally failing. Rubik just doesn't really scale well enough to be a mid laner. Pudge just is very bad in laning stage, so he just is gonna lose his lane every time pretty much, unless you just get godlike hooks and the opponent is not paying attention. And then techies, honestly, I have no idea why people are playing techies as the mid laner. Just play him as a support. He's fine there, but yeah. So these heroes I would definitely avoid, and just generally pick a hero from like S tier or A tier if you want to learn mid, and spam that hero, and you're gonna have a good time. So thank you for watching. We're gonna do more tier list videos here on this channel. Next up is gonna be the offlane role, so you don't want to miss that. Subscribe to the channel, and also some Lone Druid content is coming up because I'm really having fun with that hero. So all is willing, I will see you in those videos.